Despite Africa's vast potential, foreign direct investment remains low, with only $94 billion recorded for 54 countries last year, despite trillions in global investable capital. Now, the continent's fragmented markets, where just 5 nations account for half of its GDP, underscore the urgent need for improved collaboration and the full implementation of the African Continental Free Trade Area to enhance economic integration. CNBC Africa's Flora Limoki spoke to Zemedene Negatu, Global Chairman of Fairfax Africa Fund, for further insights.
My suggestion for Africa is let's talk business, let's talk transactions, and then Africa can come up, hopefully, a little bit higher than the low priority it occupies today. And to be honest with you, Africa has some really important cards it can play, especially when it comes to the resources that are needed to power the economies of the 21st century. EVs cannot be powered without the resources that comes out of Africa. Our cell phones cannot be charged or be manufactured without. So if we play that angle, I think Africa will come out ahead. But to be frank with you, at the moment, we're at the low end, and we need to position Africa in a way that the people, the business leaders who are now taking over power, including Elon Musk, who originally is from Africa, from South Africa, runs the world's largest EV manufacturer, Tesla, and Tesla needs a lot of resources from Africa. So I think that will be the kind of positioning I'll propose to the new administration. In fact, just the day President Trump came to the White House, one of the executive orders is to suspend aid around the world, but it's disproportionately going to affect Africa because billions of dollars every year of American aid comes to Africa. And he said, we're suspending it for 90 days to see if it aligns with American interest. American interest now is America first, economic interest. Does it benefit Americans, American middle class, the aid that the U.S. is giving? So I think a significant rethinking and reshaping is needed by Africa to get attention in the U.S., primarily from the business, the trade side of it. I think the aid is not going to be of interest to the U.S. There'll still be aid. I think the U.S. has been very generous. But if you measure it by the results that everybody's expecting over the last 40, 50 years, the hundreds of billions that are coming, has it really transformed Africa, African lives, African economies? The answer is not really. So it's maybe the right time to question the value of aid, the way it's structured. But again, Africa needs to focus on what it brings to the table from a business trade perspective.
When you look at Africa, it is significantly, it is not well represented when it comes to global financial institutions. And also this now gives us a disadvantage when it comes to access to loans and also debt distress within the continent. Therefore, how does Africa position itself to be on the table in order to be able to negotiate for workable financial architecture for the continent?
We need to focus on strengthening our financial capacity, our financial institutions, our manufacturing base, and just as importantly, our agricultural base, which we haven't done anything with. So unless we do this, which we have the capacity to do, then we won't get attention in Washington, or we might even get less attention in Beijing as well. I'm sorry. Can't just be Washington, although the U.S. is making it very clear. So these are very important questions we need to ask as Africa. We are in the private sector. I mean, we need to take the lead as well. So these are my suggestions. The natural resource alone, the people we have, the demographic advantages, how do we monetize that? We're going to be we're going from 1.5 billion to 2.5 billion in the next 25, 30 years. Very young population. How do we deploy that to take advantage of a technology revolution that is taking place in the rest of the world that is soon going to come to Africa? With all this talent, can we deploy them? Look, India came from nowhere 20 years ago to be the 5th largest economy in the world today. Okay? China, we know the story. Other parts of the world have risen. Can we learn from that and make sure we grow as well? Where's our private sector? We have very small private sector. We have very small billion-dollar-plus companies in Africa, which is small by considering the size of the continent. So these are big macro discussions we need to have. But I see the election of President Trump, the big rejigging, rethinking that he's doing, not about America first alone, but everything he's trying to do around the world. And the U.S., is a superpower. So what it does matters for Africa. The U.S. still controls the World Bank, the IMF, the big global financial institutions, our American companies. All the dollar transactions around the world has to pass through the Federal Reserve. So we have to be in tune with what the U.S. is trying to do and find a role for us with all the resources I said that we have. And I think it's doable. It just requires rethinking by African business leaders, by African private sector, that how do we succeed, survive, and thrive in a world that is changing. In the US, they talk in trillions. In Europe, they talk in trillions. Here, we can't even. I saw a number. I mean, just to put things in context. The entire global export potential is $30 trillion. I saw a graph. We didn't even matter as a dot, as a rounding error. Africa's export in total is not even a rounding error on a $30 trillion export market. So the leadership in Africa, both public and private sector, have to ask, why are we not exporting? What is it that we're missing? How did the Asian tigers develop?
And of course, when you look at the population for Africa projected to grow to up to 2.5 billion people by 2050, but then how do we raise a generation of job creators instead of as opposed to job seekers, while leveraging on the digital economy that we have, that has so much potential within Africa?
So we need to improve the ease of doing business for all these young, as you said, 2.5 billion people. The demographic dividend, to monetize it, if we want to do that. A lot of Africans are very talented. I see it across Africa. But when we look at the results, how many of them have become very successful tech companies? With AI revolution in particular, we should really be worried